Olá, meu nome é Marco Jardim e eu sou professor titular do Departamento de Matemática da Unicamp. Eu gostaria de apresentar a entrevista da professora Karen Uhlenbeck, agraciada com o Prêmio Abel em 2019, feita pelo INCTMat. Eu encontrei a professora Uhlenbeck apenas uma vez, muito brevemente, em um congresso, mas a minha carreira foi profundamente marcada por alguns dos seus artigos. Eu iniciei a minha vida científica estudando teoria de calibre e as equações de Young-Mills, mas atualmente a minha pesquisa se concentra em geometria algébrica, em particular no estudo de espaços de módulos de feixes estáveis. Essa transição da geometria diferencial para a geometria algébrica só foi possível devido a um resultado conhecido como Teorema de Donaldson-Uhlenbeck-Yau, ou correspondência de Hitchin-Kobayashi. Karen Uhlenbeck concluiu o doutorado em 1968, na Universidade Brandeis, sob a orientação de Richard Paley. Ela passou a maior parte da sua carreira acadêmica na Universidade de Texas, em Austin, e atualmente é pesquisadora visitante no Instituto de Estudos Avançados em Princeton. Ter sido a primeira mulher a receber o Prêmio Abel é o mais recente em uma longa lista de pioneirismos protagonizados por ela. Ela é conhecida como uma das fundadoras da análise geométrica e foi uma figura central em vários dos principais avanços em análise, geometria e física matemática nos últimos 40 anos, com contribuições significativas no estudo de mapas harmônicos e superfícies mínimas e nos fundamentos da teoria de calibre e equações de Young-Mills. Vou me concentrar nesse último tópico, com o qual eu sou mais familiar. Karen Uhlenbeck escreveu 2 artigos importantíssimos no começo dos anos 1980, abordando propriedades analíticas de conexões em fibrados vetoriais e de soluções das equações de Young-Mills, conhecidas como INCTMat. Em parceria com Ewald, Uhlenbeck generalizou para dimensões arbitrárias um resultado demonstrado por Donaldson para superfícies complexas, fornecendo uma ligação fundamental entre geometria diferencial e geometria algébrica. Estes 3 trabalhos foram alguns dos primeiros artigos que eu estudei durante o meu doutoramento, no final dos anos 1990, e formam a base sobre a qual uma boa parte da pesquisa em teoria de calibre, geometria diferencial e geometria algébrica feita nos últimos 40 anos se apoiou. Por fim, também é importante mencionar o seu livro Instantons and Four Manifolds, com Dan Fried, publicado em 1986, e que foi uma das primeiras exposições das aplicações da teoria de calibre à topologia de variedades em dimensão 4. E foi leitura obrigatória para várias gerações de doutorandos e pesquisadores, e eu me incluo nesse grupo, em geometria diferencial, topologia diferencial e análise geométrica. Boa entrevista.
Welcome, everyone. I am Jaqueline Mesquita, professor at the Department of Mathematics from Universidade de Brasília, and member of the Committee of INCTMat. My field of research is analysis focused on functional differential equations. This activity is organized by INCTMat, National Institute of Science and Technology in Mathematics. The goal of INCTMat is to promote and support research in mathematics. We thank IMPA for its support in the organization. Here, we will have the great honor and pleasure to interview Professor Karen Uhlenbeck. She has an impressive list of mathematical contributions and is also a great source of inspiration to all of us. To interview Professor Uhlenbeck, we will count with the participation of Professor Maria Amélia Salazar, from Universidade Federal Fluminense, Professor Miriam Pereira da Silva, from Universidade Federal da Paraíba, Patricia Ewald, Master Student at Universidade de São Paulo. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation for this interview, Karen. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you here.
Thank you. I look forward to the interview.
Thank you very much. Brazil is a huge country, extremely diverse, that is by no means currently reflected in academia. There are also huge challenges for inclusion of all different groups of underrepresented minorities. We also know that you had some Brazilian PhD students and visited Unicamp in the late 90s. Brazilian mathematicians like to recall the old times of the Brazilian Mathematical Colloquium, with the first one about 60 years ago with 49 participants, and to compare it with the huge ICM held in 2018, a Fields Medal in 2014, and the recent promotion to the elite group 5 of the International Mathematical Union. This reflects a dramatic growth of mathematics in the country. Other countries in Latin America also experimented an impressive evolution. Could you share your impressions about the evolution of mathematics in Brazil and in Latin America?
Well, in fact, when I was a student, I already thought of Brazil as a very important place to do mathematics because I had many friends. I was in something called global analysis, and global analysis also include dynamical systems. And dynamical systems was IMPA was a very strong place for dynamical systems. I believe I met Maurizio Peixoto when I was still a student, and I thought of him as one of the big shots or one of the elite people in mathematics. And so I've always thought of Brazil as a very important place in mathematics, in particular IMPA, although I've never visited IMPA myself. But anyway, certainly I've had 3 very good students from Brazil, and there have been other very good students. And I know, in fact, in this country already, many mathematicians from Brazil. So I have a very good impression of it. I don't keep up with mathematics so much, so my impression is actually from this was already in the 1960s and 1970s. I already had a good impression of Brazilian mathematics.
Thank you. Hi, Professor. I'm Miriam Pereira. I'm professor at the Department of Mathematics from Universidade Federal da Paraíba. I work in Singularity Theory. I'm very grateful to participate in this interview. I would like to keep asking you about your academic life. What do you think were the most defining moments of your career? We are interested both in events within mathematical community and beyond, such as societal and cultural changes that may have had an impact in your development as a person and as a mathematician.
Well, certainly I'm a product of my age and times. And probably the first thing that happened to me that was very important was Sputnik, which was put up by the Russians, the satellite put up by the Russians in 1957. And in response to this, the United States government and all the scientists decided the United States was very far behind in mathematics, and they put in a lot of programs so that students in the United States could learn science and math. And not only that, they thought it was so important that they said, we even want women and minorities. I mean, I distinctly remember being told it's so important to have scientists that will take women and minorities. And so when I entered college, I was given the opportunity to study a very advanced, I didn't even know calculus. I hadn't learned calculus in high school like many people did, but I started in a very fast-moving course in my freshman year. And I had been a physics major, and I just liked it. I still remember being shown how to take a derivative by the TA and turning to my friend. I still know the man next to me. And I said, Tom, are you really allowed to do that? So when I entered college, there were opportunities, and not only that, it was recognized that women would be allowed to have these opportunities. So I took graduate courses when I was undergraduate, and I got a National Science Foundation fellowship. And then later on, when it came to get a job, there were, of course, women were not allowed to have jobs. But then this was in the wake of the second wave of feminism in the United States. And there were a lot of movements to actually open up careers to women. And I did not actually take part in these, but I benefited terrifically from the fact that there were women out there saying women should be allowed to be professors and so forth. So I got my first assistant professorship in 1971, I'm sorry. 1972 was something called Title IX in the United States, which made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of sex in any program that took money, was supported by United States funds. And so I benefited terrifically from the times, and I never would have made it without it. So, and I had very little to do with any of this too. I just took advantage of it. Thank you.
I want to ask you about learning math. And in the interview with Celebration Mathematica, you mentioned that you are interested in learning more about things that are not pure mathematics, but are mathematics connected with other areas. What sparks your interest in these areas? And how does the pure mathematics benefit from these interactions?
Well, in fact, my interest in this came out through a graduate student. Her name was Dorothy Buck, and she was a graduate student in topology at the University of Texas. And she actually got interested in knotted DNA. And she actually went and worked in a lab, and she had a joint PhD in knotted DNA and in topology. And she still works in the combination of these things. And she got me involved in trying to teach a course to biology majors. And I discovered we had an honors course in math. She actually designed the course in mathematical biology. And I discovered that even the straight A students in biology had not comprehended any of the mathematics. And they did not really understand what calculus was doing. And at the time, I was teaching an ordinary differential equations course, and I was influenced to try to show the students how some of these things were applied. And I discovered all these very interesting applications of mathematics that were very basic and that mathematicians tend not even to know. For example, in my freshman honors math course, I would always do the SIRS model. That's SIRS. That's the basic epidemiology model that you've probably heard about in the last few years. But I discovered that the applied mathematics was extremely important in biology. And then I discovered it was important in a lot of things. And I have to confess that if I were to go into math again, I might be tempted to go into more applied areas than I would, because it's so very important.
It is a pleasure to meet you, and I would like to thank INCTMat and, well, you for the opportunity to be here today and interview you. My name is Patricia Ewald. I am a master's student at Universidade de São Paulo, and my field of study is gauge theory and geometric analysis. The first thing I would like to ask you is, Could you briefly explain your research to a non-expert audience?
That is very difficult. In fact, you know, I always say that the kind of geometric analysis that I do is even hard to explain to a computer. That is, people use computers to design solutions of all sorts, but the kind of math I do is actually very difficult to put on a computer because it combines geometry and topology and analysis in a way that is hard to explain to a computer. And it's hard to get the information out of the computer. I guess the most important thing in what I do is the notion of scaling. That is, you have an equation, and this equation looks very different at large scales and at small scales. And the learning how to control, to balance the difference between what happens at a very small scale and what happens globally at a large scale is actually one of the important sort of foundations of what is now known as geometric analysis. And so I think the fact that I was able to find out how to do this in many very basic equations. In fact, I don't know how to explain to a non-mathematician, but there are three types of equations that you can study, and they correspond to three theories in physics. There's something that's called that's a well-behaved problem, which is called renormalizable, which means that if you look at the problem on a small scale, it becomes almost linear and you can understand it very easily. And then there's what's called unrenormalizable, or above the critical dimension, which means that basically you have no control over the problem. If you look at it at small scales, it simply gets worse. And those kind of problems were not studied at all when I started out. Now they're really at the basis for a lot of string theory and so forth, where you actually impose different conditions of supersymmetry to solve the problem. And then the problem that I have actually worked on most, which is scale invariant problems, but which is renormalizable, but not super renormalizable. And these are problems that look the same in any scale. That is, the best way to say it is if you have an energy and you actually change the scale at which you look at it, the size of the energy doesn't change. And so the scale invariant problems are what I got involved in at first. And these involve both harmonic maps and minimal surfaces and gauge theories. And but this important distinction, when I was a student, the difference between these things was not understood yet. And in fact, the idea that we should have the same way of judging problems as physicists did and could communicate back and forth about them was also new at the time. So that was actually very exciting to take part in this sort of a dialogue between mathematics and physics that went on at the same time that we were developing the theories of these problems.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And on that note, you have mentioned several times on a few of your papers that Richard Palais was responsible for your interest in gauge theory. Could you expand on this? And more generally, could you describe how you became aware of the interest of mathematicians in Yang-Mills theory and what the atmosphere was like around that time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, yeah. Let me start out with telling you what it was like when I was a student. When I was a student, there was not too much contact between mathematicians and physicists, but there were a lot of mathematicians who were sort of interested in physics. But I still remember. It was my thesis advisor, although he was talking to a physicist, and what he said to the physicist is, let me explain to you what you're doing. In other words, he was saying, I can interpret what you're doing mathematically, and I'm going to tell you what to do. And let me tell you, that's not a good way for physics and mathematics to interact. And what happened when I was a student was that before my time, when I was still, before I started working in gauge theory, mathematicians and physicists discovered that there was a dialogue between what physicists call gauge theory and what mathematicians called fiber bundles. And there were, I had actually read some of the basic literature in mathematics, which I didn't understand at all. It was very abstract. I also remember the first time I heard a talk on gauge theory. It was at the first conference I was ever invited to. I was invited to a conference in Japan, and I remember Jim Simons, who's now makes terrific amounts of money for mathematicians on the stock market. Anyway, Jim Simons got up and tried to explain to the audience what gauge theory was, and I didn't understand anything. But the way I got interested in gauge theory was that I attended 4 lectures by Michael Atiyah at the University of Chicago. They were one of these named lecture series, and he actually talked about it. And he talked about it at least more from the geometric point of view. The literature and the subject was very topological and very abstract, but he talked about it more from the way the physicists thought about it, and he wrote down some equations, and he had a little book called The Geometry of Gauge Fields, which I didn't understand very well. But I discovered that I could, by thinking more like a physicist and writing the equations the way physicists wrote them, that I could understand them. And I actually was inspired by those talks that I actually started to work on the problem. And I think my thesis advisor encouraged me. Actually, my thesis advisor, when I graduated and went off to Berkeley for a postdoc, told me to learn general relativity. I remember that. I don't think he actually told me to learn gauge theory, but he may have encouraged me. I don't know. But I basically taught myself gauge theory because the point is the way the topologists were thinking about it wasn't very useful. And you had to actually think about it more as a mathematician, more like the physicists were thinking about it, which is writing down the thing in coordinates. That's always useful, to write things in coordinates. Anyway.
Well, thank you very much for that answer. That was the one I wanted to hear about the most. So thank you very much for that. In your opinion, what are the next, I mean, you said you're not thinking about math that much lately, but what are the next central problems in geometry and geometric analysis?
Well, you know, I don't know. If I did, I know the problems that are central right now in geometric analysis are things like compactness of Riemannian metrics with bounds on scalar curvature and Ricci curvature. There's curve flow. There's mean curvature flow. There are a lot of different topics. There is still a lot of work being done on minimal surfaces. But I don't know where the next most important thing is. I know there are some problems that people have never really understood how to look at. I mean, for example, I don't know how important a problem is, but it's very frustrating that there is no theory of Yang-Mills equations in dimensions bigger than 4. I mean, no analytic theory. You have Hermitian Yang-Mills you can study, but actually Yang-Mills equations from a variational viewpoint is no further than it was when I stopped thinking about gauge theory in the 80s. There's some really interesting questions about studying representations using flat bundle structures and compactifying the space of representations. Cliff Taubes has done a lot of work on that. There are a lot of very hard problems, but I don't know. I can't actually, if I could tell you what the most important problems I would, but I'm not sure. I don't really have an answer to that one.
Professor, let's back in the time again. And I will ask you, in a recent interview, Caio Negreiros, one of your PhD students, talked about your seminar in Chicago in the late 80s. He describes it as very cheerful and rich, with a large spectrum of topics and an impressive list of participants. Could you talk a little about that period and also about the importance of seminars for mathematicians?
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting time, the 1980s, because that was a time when geometric analysis was very new. And it's very hard to, if you go to a seminar in geometric analysis, it's very likely someone will mention a theorem or a result from the late 1970s and early 1980s. I mean, Yao knocked off conjecture after conjecture. Taubes proved the existence of, Taubes developed a gluing technique, which is used everywhere nowadays. The early 80s were, I was at the Institute for Advanced Study in 1979, 1980, in a special year in geometric analysis. And it was just a very exciting time. And as I said, if you actually go to a seminar today, it's very common that you will hear somebody mention a theorem from that period. And so it was a very exciting time, and there were lots of problems. I mean, I do remember a PhD student of mine from the University of Chicago. I gave him a problem of looking at coupled Yang-Mills fields. And yeah, I remember also telling him, oh, it works and it works for the abelian case. It's got to work for this case and so forth. And I had never heard of stability theory. And together he said, no, it doesn't work out, and told me why. He was very stubborn and very right. And then we discovered there was something called stability theory from algebraic geometry that we were running against. And, a whole field opened up, and I had kind of naively given that to a student as a thesis problem, right? So it was a very exciting period in geometric analysis at that time. And and I had many more problems I think my problems for now are not nearly as interesting as the problems I was running across then. But it was also, I was just at the right time in the right place, if you know what I mean.
Again, recalling Caio's words, he mentioned that when he started his PhD, he used to call you Professor Uhlenbeck, and that you asked him to call you simply Karen. He also mentioned that you were extremely supportive with him and also very helpful in difficult moments. Could you talk about your relation with your students? And could you also share with us the difficulties of balancing friendly environment while keeping track of everyone's professional responsibilities?
Yeah, well, the main thing with students is that you have to let them go at their own pace and their own time. And I have a rule about it. I would not think about a student's problem except when the student was in the office. And then I was allowed to think about it. So I've heard stories about people who would go and give them students problems and figure out and know ahead of time how it would work and so forth. But all my students have been very different. That when people say they know how to teach math, or that you should teach math this way, or the right way to teach is this, I think, goodness, if my PhD students thought so very differently about things, what must normal people think? How different they must be about mathematics. And so mainly one has to listen to the students. One of the rules I developed, maybe not when Kyle was my student, but I learned later on to have a rule. The rule is when you came into my office, you had to have at least a question. You did not have to have done anything. You did not have to have proved a theorem or read anything. You had to come in with a question. And so the main thing is to get students to talk. And then you try to, and make them take part in it. And yeah, I don't know. I do have to say that in all my years of having students, their personal difficulties in sum total were far greater than their mathematical problems. So I think for most of us mathematicians, in the end, mathematics is the easy part of life. But and I think I try to remember that when I'm talking to anybody younger than me, which is everybody nowadays. But I don't know. It's having a mathematical relationship with somebody is a very good way to become good friends. It's a very nice way of having an interaction with another human being, is to work with them mathematically. But but the thing is you can't go into it with a preconceived idea of what's going to happen. It has to develop naturally.
Thank you very much, Karen. And in recent years, the pressure for publishing papers has increased enormously, perhaps leading to the publication of many irrelevant works and also discouraging the involvement in deep and hard projects. This may be especially difficult for young researchers. Could you tell us how you see the evolution of the publications along your career? Could you give some advice how to resist and combat this pressure?
Well, I don't really know how to combat the pressure. I wouldn't be able to do it myself. I said right from a very early age, one good theorem every 5 years is a fantastic record, and one has to remember that for oneself. But I don't really know. I don't know how to combat the pressure. I'm not sure I could. I mean, I'm retired now and I can think about mathematics when I feel like it. And, but I also need somebody else to work on, or I won't continue. I won't pursue it, finish it up. But I don't actually know what to do about pressure. I think the only good advice I would have is to have other people to work with, so you can kind of spread the pressure around. And and also personally, when I look at somebody's I am suspicious of people who publish a lot of papers. I don't know how many mathematicians are, but if I see too many papers, I discount the person's record. That's my own private opinion. So because there's no point in publishing all that stuff. So, but advice of dealing with the world, I'm not so good at, you know.
Hello, Professor Uhlenbeck. I'm Maria Amélia Salazar. I'm a professor at the Institute of Mathematics and Statistics of Universidade Federal Fluminense. It is an honor for me to be here interviewing you together with my colleagues. So my next questions are about elaboration of projects. So could you please tell us something about how to find a good balance between ambition, innovation, and feasibility of a project? What are the aspects that are most important to you?
In order to do good mathematics, you can't let anything get between you and the mathematics. So if you're having, and this maybe isn't as hard as it sounds, because if you have other problems, it's actually a good way to escape your other problems, is to go into do it and do the math. But you somehow can't be worried about the outcome or worried about publishing it or worried about what's going to happen. You just have to be interested in what's doing it and try to follow where the mathematics is taking you, and and don't be afraid to look up papers. I mean, I find it's kind of interesting. You get I have a collaboration going with a former student of mine, and everyone, he keeps on giving me these papers in topology and trying to tell me what's in them, and I'm afraid to read them. But after I've looked at them about 10 times and go back over them, then I begin to understand what the theorems say. And so one shouldn't be afraid to look at unusual and different mathematics if it's where your mathematics is taking you. But if you get too worried about ambition and publishing and all that stuff and let it get in the way of your thinking about the mathematics, then it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, that's as I said, for me, mathematics is actually an escape. I mean, I am able to leave the problems that I have to deal with every day and escape to doing mathematics. And if I'm really ill or really can't do it, then I have to read a murder mystery. I can't do mathematics. So there are other ways to escape. But anyway. But I don't really, the advice is that you really have to concentrate and just not let your mind go where it's going to go. I mean, so planning carefully doesn't work very well at all. You never know where your good collaborators are going to come from. I mean,
thank you. And so maybe you already answered, but I ask you anyway, do you have some advice for young people for the preparation of proposals?
Yes. Be as clear, concise, and careful as you can, and don't make it too long. People, I mean, I have actually many older people that I advise on proposals for things, and I can't get them to actually make it simple. And if the person is knowledgeable about your field, the person probably can actually fill in the details if you make it clear you know what they are. And if most of the people reading your proposals will not know the details, and if you can be as clear and concise about what you hope to happen, and for the people in general, you cannot make a proposal or a too simple. But you need a good idea. I mean, and but just filling a page up with words does no good at all.
Our next questions are about underrepresented minorities, but before asking you, let me provide some local context to the audience. So in Brazil, women in mathematics are underrepresented, being less than 25% of the faculty body. Adding the issue of race in Brazil, a country where more than half of the population self-identifies as Black, this includes mixed and non-mixed race Black people. This discrepancy is much more dramatic. As of today, we don't have demographic data of faculty in mathematics that accounts for race and gender, but data on general graduate education revealed that Black women with PhD account for less than 3% of the teaching staff. In 2017, Black women were 3% of the total recipients of grants and scholarship of the Brazilian research agency CNPq. So, in the Nobel Prize interview, you mentioned that you wanted to invest part of your prize money in underrepresented minorities, and you said that you wanted to do something that is going to work. So could you please give us an idea of the kind of projects or diversity efforts that you think that work?
Actually, I don't consider myself an expert on this at all. If I've learned anything about from having lived so long is that I probably wouldn't come across the answer myself. So what I did was I went to my colleagues in the EDGE program. It's EDGE. So you could look it up on the internet. The EDGE program has been running a program for underrepresented women and for women, and which is 50. It was started in Spelman College and Bryn Mawr College. One is a historically Black women's college. The other is a historically women's college in Pennsylvania. And for many years, they've run a program which is introducing these women, preparing them for graduate school. It was taking women between undergraduate and graduate and giving them a crash course of a month. I think it's a month or so. And this program has been very successful well over half the women, Black women, the underrepresented women from underrepresented minorities who have PhDs in mathematics came out of this program. So I turned to them and I said, well, what should I do? But at this time I had, from my own experience, another idea, which you need to remember. That is, when in the 1980s, when I was the only woman at a professor at a major US mathematics department, I was very much in need of advice myself. And so I felt that what I wanted to actually help people was at the mid-career level, when they were suddenly being asked to mentor students, and they themselves were very isolated. I mean, you say 3%, but I mean, there are probably many universities in Brazil in which only one woman faculty member is, there's only one or none Black faculty members. Yeah, I also have another bit of advice which I discovered because I was at the University of Chicago for 4 years and I never met another woman professor there. I cannot believe this happened. When I moved to the University of Texas, I immediately formed a lunch group with all the other women in mathematics and engineering and science. And we had a lunch group, and it was very helpful to this only woman in astronomy, very helpful to the only woman in computer science. So there are things you can do. I have some other things that I've done that I think have been successful throughout the years, but the thing is the main thing is don't try to solve the problem yourself. I mean, and also And also, by the way, I want to add another comment about the difficulties that underrepresented minorities have in the United States. I've had many women tell me, European, in particular, the last one who told me this was a European woman, that actually it was more a problem for her that her parents were working class than that she was a woman. And so in many cases, it's not necessarily the many of underrepresented minorities have problems which originate from the fact that they come from a different, they don't come from the educated elite classes that their competitors come from. They actually have parents that do labor, are laborers and so forth. And this means that they themselves don't have the resources to fall back on. So the problems may not be exactly what you think they are. So anyway, I can go on and on and on about that, but anyway.
Thank you so much for your answer. So nowadays there are some controversial positions on diversity efforts, focus on the recruitment and hiring of women and other minorities, like tenure track positions for women, for example. So could you please tell us what you think about such efforts and what you see as pros and cons?
Well, I don't think it'll happen unless I don't think there are very many cons. What the cons are is that some people don't understand that this is a necessary thing. In fact, I think I heard the comment made about the United States, which is a very telling thing. It says that it's not that that minority people need science. It's that science needs minorities, because in order to actually have a wide, be listened to by a wide group of people and respected by a wide group of people, we have to represent a wide group of people, which means that we in science desperately need these minorities. So the difficulty is with the people who don't understand this, not with the programs.
Thanks for this very nice answer. It's very, very interesting. And you mentioned once that hiking and going to the top of the mountains is one of your hobbies. Could you explain your feelings when you reach the top? What is your favorite hike?
Oh, well, I can't do my favorite hikes anymore. I don't know. You're up there and there's nothing between you and the world. And some of my favorite hikes, I have a summer place in Bozeman, and I'm afraid that I've been up Cinnamon Mountain or Mount Blackmore for the last time in my life, but the problem is when you can't climb mountains anymore, you have to find something else to do, and I'm still looking.
Professor, to the end of the interview, we would like if you would like to give a message for the Brazilian mathematics community.
I think Brazil has done very well in encouraging mathematics and developing mathematics in the country, and maybe the thing to do is to think well of yourselves for having done quite a bit, and for having made such good strides, and for having the support of politicians in your country for developing mathematics. And and I guess if I have to have from my own experience, I would say, and you want to be sure and do it in a way that feels right for Brazil, and don't go around copying other people.
On behalf of INCTMat, the Brazilian mathematics community, and for of us, we thank you so much for your time and for this interview. Thank you so much, Professor.
Okay, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.